Jovan, Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers beat writer for The Athletic, and welcome to another Lakers post-game reaction show. Just got back from Fiserv Forum, where the Lakers lost 126-106 to drop their third straight game. They are now 40-24 on the season, tied with Houston for the number 4 seed. They are technically a few percentage points ahead of them, but things are not great right now in Lakerland. They are kicking off a stretch of 6 games in 8 days. They are shorthanded. The team sent home LeBron James, Rui Hachimura, and Jackson Hayes, as well as Maxi Kleber. But the first 3 are all day-to-day moving forward, but they are not going to be playing in Denver, and that is setting up a very difficult back-to-back for the Lakers heading to Denver, arguably the toughest place to play on the second night of a back-to-back given the altitude. But before we get into tonight's game, you guys know the drill. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. For those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. What up to everybody in the chat? Shout out to the Late Night Gang. Shout out to Kevin Cambridge, J Note, Angelco, Mario, Cardcorn, Liberty, Mitch Potter, Rayman Loyal, Colby, Jeff, Didi. Shout out to everybody here. So overarching takeaway for me is going to be just not enough horses. And I'm not going to make excuses for the Lakers necessarily, because I think these guys are all professionals and you show up to win the game. And I think they still have Luka, they still have AR, they still have Dorian and Gabe and Dalton and Vando and Jordan Goodwin. And like they still have some of their key rotation players. And obviously I would say 2 of their 3 best players. But it like, especially this matchup, this was a really tough matchup for them just based on Milwaukee's size. That front court is 7 foot 7'1" in Lopez, a legit 6'11" in Giannis, and 6'9" with long arms in Kyle Kuzma. So that's a monster front line going up against the Lakers. Technically started Alex Len, DFS, and Gabe in their front court. Defensively, of course, Luka is more of the 3 or the 4 in this grouping, but like Gabe was technically listed at small forward. And I think this manifested in a lot of ways. It didn't really, like, the Bucks only scored 38 points in the paint. They actually tied the Lakers both with points in the paint. But I think that the real way that they burned the Lakers was with their 3-point shooting, because of the Lakers having to load up the paint and try to protect the rim and doubling and even tripling Giannis and struggling to close out to weak side shooters. And also, I think in some cases, allowing some of these guys to shoot threes and like that being the guys they want to shoot, those guys just going off. Like Kevin Porter Jr. Had 5 threes and got really hot there, especially in that second quarter. And then I think the other thing was just the free throw line and how much the Lakers had to foul the Bucks because of them getting downhill, getting offensive rebounds, and just how much pressure Giannis and just like, I mean, I'm looking at it. Kevin Porter Jr. had 7 attempts. Dame had 8 attempts. Giannis had 13. Brook Lopez had 5. So like just their ability to put pressure on the rim and get by the initial line of defense. So that was a concern for me that I talked about in the last episode of Buha's block. It didn't really play out where Giannis had like a monster game. I mean, he finished with 24, 12, and 9. But I thought you saw with the assists in particular, Milwaukee was just pinging the ball around the floor and generating a lot of high looks. And that was because they kept collapsing the Lakers defense because the Lakers were so small. And the game really flipped around the middle of the third quarter when I think JJ had seen enough of Alex Len and he yanked him from the game and then just went centerless, and the Lakers just didn't have the requisite size, even within their small ball looks, to protect the rim against Milwaukee. And that's when you saw Giannis get a couple baskets at the rim. You saw them have several kick out opportunities, some leak outs in transition, and also off of turnovers. So like the game really spiraled in the middle of the third. And that's when the Lakers decided to go small, which I did not understand or agree with. But at the same time, I think from JJ's perspective, it's like, if it's Alex Len or small, we'll go small. I thought Christian Koloko should have gotten a little bit more run at that point. I know he ended up playing more in the fourth quarter, but and then Markieff Morris also played a bit in the fourth, actually played the entire fourth. And, you know, but we're talking about Alex Len, Christian Koloko, and Markieff Morris here. It's not making a huge difference either way. I thought Koloko had a nice like first half of his first shift, and then picked up a couple fouls and started to look more like a two-way guy who was just kind of figuring things out still. But you know, first possession, he gets that lob from Luka, and you saw like the vision of what it can be down the road, but he still has a ways to go. So I think for the Lakers, it just came down to, I mean, Luka and Austin combined for 73, and they still lost by 20. And it was partly because like Dalton was the only other player to score in double figures, and he barely got there with 10, and he didn't get there until the fourth quarter. So like right now, their guys are not making shots. They're not generating the same caliber of shots when a LeBron and a Rui and a Jackson are there putting pressure on the rim, cutting. LeBron, of course, orchestrating and helping Luka and Austin out there. So and spacing the floor as well. So it's just, they're just depleted. Like and it's not to make that into an excuse, because I think from an execution perspective and in a rotation perspective, like there are certainly things they can be doing better, but I don't think that even if they were maxing things out, I still think, especially in this matchup, the Denver matchup, they are just very undermanned right now, and they are playing guys that should not be playing in these big games against really good opponents on the road. And that, like, I don't want to overcomplicate it beyond that. Like, I think when healthy, we've seen this group's ceiling. When healthy during the past like 2 months, they've basically won every big game outside of the Boston game. And even that game, LeBron got injured in the fourth. So we don't know what that would have been like had LeBron stayed healthy. So I'm not, but you know, this is a loss that, to be honest, I expected. It went about as expected. I, coming into this one, kind of thought it was going to be a blowout. And I think that the question now for the Lakers is like, how do they approach the Denver game? Does Luka play in that game? He was asked about it tonight and said, we'll see. We'll see. I don't know about that one. I don't know yet. So, you know, it's unclear if he's going to play in the Denver game. If he doesn't play, it's going to be a massacre. If he does play, it still might be a massacre, because again, I don't, like, Alex Len is not executing that defensive game plan that they ran against Denver last time. This was probably his best game, but it continues to be such a low bar. And Brook Lopez just cooked him at the 3-point line. He really struggled helping and recovering out to the 3-point line. So the Lakers are in a tough spot here until like really the only good news is that those injured guys are day to day. And I will touch on that in a little bit later with one of my takeaways. But until they get back, they are compromised right now. And when they're playing these teams that have a certain level of size or just a certain level of talent, I think that they're in a shootout that I think it's going to be hard for them to win more often than not. Notable performers, I mentioned it, but Luka had 45 points, which is a Laker high for him. 14 of 27 shooting, 7 of 13 on threes, 10 of 12 from the free throw line. This was his best offensive game easily. He carried the Lakers offense. Still struggling with the turnovers, had 6 turnovers. That is 7 straight games with 5 or more turnovers for him. So that is an area of the floor that he needs to clean up. And it kind of reminds me of earlier in the season. Remember, LeBron kind of had that stretch where he was turning the ball over a lot. I think Luka owned it after the game, took accountability, said it's on him. Like JJ kind of deflected it, said it wasn't Luka's fault, or some of them weren't Luka's fault, and that he thinks he's generally been awesome during this stretch, but Luka took accountability and said he needs to be better, that turnovers are the most important, or keeping the basketball is the most important part of the game, and he hasn't been doing a good job of that. So that's something that he's monitoring. Austin, I thought, had a slow start and kind of looked like the previous couple games or 3 games of how he's played, and then really broke out as the game went on, more so in the second half. Gave the Lakers some life there early in the fourth, where it looked like they were potentially going to make a run to cut it. I think DFS had an open 3 on the right wing that he missed, that had he made it, it would have been a 14-point game. So at that point, it was already like a 20-something point game. Lakers made some shots. I think Austin had 3 threes in the fourth to kind of make like the fake comeback that every team makes when they're down 20. But Austin, I thought overall started to look more like himself. I think from a playmaking perspective, like him and Luka, they both had 3 assists, and that was partly the lack of shot making from their teammates, but also I think those guys just had some individual advantages, so they were really cooking. And I'll touch a little bit more on that with my stat of the night, but 28 points, 8 rebounds for Austin. He and Luka not only led the team in scoring, but also led the team in rebounding, which I also think shows the state of the Lakers rebounding and front court right now. Outside of those 2 guys, the only other guy I would mention is Dalton, who had 10 points in 22 minutes. I thought he had a couple of nice off the dribble plays, and we've seen those flashes of him, of how he looked at Tennessee in terms of that ability to self-create off the dribble. It's something we haven't really seen much this season consistently, and that's more, I think, of how they've used him than any limitations on Dalton's end. But we did see him with the ball a little bit more, and I wonder if that is something that the Lakers try to unlock moving forward, because I think you can make a real case right now that it's between Dalton and Gabe in terms of like the third best healthy shot creator. And I kind of trust Dalton more right now. Like I think Gabe is he had a couple of drives tonight, a couple of nice drives, but with me, it's with Gabe, it's more like the catch and shoot spot up stuff. And when he has his feet set, I mean, he had a really rough shooting performance, opened the game missing 3 straight corner threes. But in general, Gabe has been shooting well for going on almost 3 months now. So he's been in a little bit of a slump. So is DFS. But I think I'd like to see maybe some more Dalton being involved in the offense. And he only took 7 shots tonight, which was the 5th most on the team. And I think I would like to see that crack double digits, and it might in Denver, especially if Luka does not play. Stat of the night to me is 18 assists for the Lakers. And that's just a very low number. Not even 50% of their makes were assisted on. And so they made 38 shots, only 18 assists. Conversely, looking at Milwaukee, they had 30 assists on 41 makes. So that's roughly 75% of their makes were assisted on. And tonight it really was like a shot-making clinic from Luka and Austin. And, kind of similar in some ways to the Brooklyn game, but those guys just made more shots tonight, even if the Lakers' output was relatively similar. But I think the fact that they didn't even assist on 50% of their makes is a bit emblematic of where the offense is right now, the lack of shot making from the supporting cast, and also Luka and Austin having to carry such a big load offensively. So I think that is something to monitor moving forward. And like assists, there's a lot of things that go into an assist, and just because a team is a high assist team, it doesn't necessarily mean the ball movement is good. But I think sometimes having like this low of an assist rate in terms of your made baskets, like that to me is a sign of just where the offense is right now, and it's not in a good place. And it's often it's Luka having to cook guys one-on-one, and he cooked everybody. He cooked Dame, he cooked Torian, he cooked Kuz, he cooked Gary Trent, he cooked Kevin Porter, like he cooked all of them. And he was targeting guys. He targeted AJ Green a bit. Like he was in his bag. But the Lakers need, I think, the ball movement and like the offensive organization. I thought was better tonight, especially more so in the first half. But it still has a ways to go, I think. Then takeaway number 1 is going to be Luka Magic. And this, like tonight, Luka's shot making, he had that 1-3 right in front of the Lakers bench, right corner, where he separates from AJ Green and hits the fading away step back almost out of bounds. And that's like kind of his trademark shot, at least in LA. And 7 threes tonight, again, tied his season high, actually. His season high with Dallas was 45. So his Laker high is now 45, and also tied his season high with 45. And really, if not for Luka, if not for this specific performance from Luka, this game is, a 30+ point blowout. Like he really kept them in it with just his shot making and attacking guys in the pick and roll. One of the things I talked about on the last episode of Buha's Block was I thought the next couple of matchups with Milwaukee and Denver were going to be advantageous for Luka, just because they don't have the personnel to defend him. They started this game with Taurean Prince. Then, as I mentioned, they tried Kyle Kuzma. They tried Kevin Porter Jr., Gary Trent, but all those guys are either too small, too slow, or just not strong enough, or some combination of all those things. And then you factor in Brook Lopez is a drop big who does not like coming out on the perimeter. And Luka, he had that one step back at the top of the arc on Lopez, where he like floated basically from about the free throw line all the way beyond the arc and drained a 3 in Lopez's face. I think that was like midway through the first quarter, but a really impressive Luka performance. And I know it's a loss, and he said as much after the game, that he was like, I'm not going to, like, we lost. It doesn't really matter how many points I scored. But I think for him, he continues to look more comfortable in like, the progress isn't necessarily linear, but like in general, it's linear and going, it's trending upward. And I think if there is, I talked about potential silver linings earlier in the week with the LeBron injury news, and this might be one of them, is just Luka getting going, looking more like his Dallas self. And certainly he still has some things to clean up in terms of the turnovers, in terms of, I think, a little bit of the shot selection, but for the most part, I think that's all stuff he's all shots that he's capable of making. And tonight he made over 50% of his shots. So it's like, you're not really going to nitpick that. Got to the free throw line tonight, 10 and 12, as I mentioned, and I thought could have taken even more. JJ finally said it after the game that he feels like Luka gets a bad whistle, and he's like, that's just a fact. So we'll see if the Lakers kind of harping on Luka and the way he's officiated and not getting to the free throw line. Maybe sometimes when you chirp about that in the media, it does have, it's something that the refs are aware of, and you start to get more calls, at least temporarily, and maybe that'll be an ongoing thing for them. But I think outside of the turnovers, Luka was great tonight. The assists, he only had 3, but he could have easily had 6, 7, 8 if, Gabe went 0 for 5 on threes. A bunch of those were off of Luka passes. Dorian was 1 for 5. Goodwin was 0 for 1. Vando was 0 for 1. Lakers shot decent on threes overall, 15 of 40, but Luka kind of carried that at making 7 of 13. So Luka, to me, tonight was the first, like, of course, and we've only had a couple of games. It's this one versus the Brooklyn game, and he was much better. He over doubled his output offensively in terms of points in this one. But I thought we saw the tonight, in my opinion, was the closest he looked like to the Dallas version of himself from a scoring perspective. Of course, the passing there, he's also just playing with a limited supporting cast right now. But this, to me, what was a step in that direction, and he continues to take steps in that direction. So tonight was Luka Magic, in my opinion. Then takeaway number 2 is the injury updates. So as aforementioned, LeBron James, Rui Hachimura, Jackson Hayes, and Maxi Kleber all left the road trip, all returned home. Everyone except for Kleber is considered day-to-day moving forward. They will all, of course, be out tomorrow in Denver. But I think with Rui and Jackson, JJ had already said those guys were day-to-day or close to returning. So I think that's just further confirmation of that. But I think the big thing here is the LeBron update, where Initially, it was reported by ESPN that he was going to be out for more likely weeks than days. I confirmed that report. That was the intel that was out there. And it has continued to kind of be out there that he's probably like next week's probably on the early side, if not the following week. And if he truly is day to day and out Thursday, that means he could theoretically return as soon as Sunday against Phoenix. I think that might be a quick turnaround, especially with the 12:30 p.m. Pacific time start. That's basically not like 36 hours after the Denver game. They're playing Phoenix. So is he going to be ready in the 36 hours after, in between the Denver and Phoenix games? That might be too soon. But if he can return for the San Antonio game or maybe the Denver-Milwaukee back-to-back midweek, I think that is, of course, great news for the Lakers and a much needed return for LeBron. So too early to tell when exactly he'll be back, but if he's back at some point next week, I think ultimately that's like a win overall and a really positive thing for the Lakers. You don't want to rush him back, and that would be my only concern with this news is like, are they but you would assume no one knows his body as well as LeBron and Mike Mancias, his longtime trainer. So if they are okaying him to be day to day and return as soon as next week, then I think that's obviously something that you trust. At the same time, the one caveat I will eject here is we have heard guys be day to day for the Lakers and that they still just don't play for however long. Like Jackson Hayes was initially day to day with this injury. Now he's missed multiple games. And so that's like the one thing we'll see is this a real day to day or is it sometimes a Lakers day to day, which guys can be day to day for weeks. So I don't think it's going to be that long for any of these guys necessarily, but that is just something to like, maybe LeBron ends up still returning next week, but it's like later in the week versus earlier in the week, which was the way that it seemed JJ was indicating, but we shall see. And then takeaway number 3 for me, just this 6 days and 8 day stretch. Like this is I asked Luka about it after the game. He said he's never experienced anything like this, and that ultimately they're professionals and they got to show up and just kind of get through it. But like, this is, I believe the Lakers are the only team to go through this type of stretch all season. Doesn't make it any easier that they play Milwaukee and Denver back to back twice on both, the two bookends of this stretch. But this is going to be a gauntlet for the Lakers. I'm really interested to see how they approach this Denver game. Does Luka play? Does Austin play? Austin was sitting there after the game with a giant ice wrap, and apparently he's been dealing with some wrist soreness or around that area for a couple weeks now. And he's a guy who will never make an excuse, but I would have to think that's probably played into some of his shooting struggles as well. So the Lakers are really banged up, and they have their toughest part of the schedule coming up at arguably the worst time of the season for them in terms of health. So that is something to just like the Denver game is going to be really tough. Then they come back. I guess some good news for them is De'Aaron Fox is going to miss the San Antonio game. He's out for the season. So I think that game becomes a game they really should win regardless of who's available. The Phoenix game is kind of trending that way as well. So if they can get the Phoenix and San Antonio games and then just win one of the 3 remaining Denver-Milwaukee games, you go 3-3. I think that's a win based on who's available and based on the strength of schedule and 3 consecutive back-to-backs. So that, I guess, Luka trending in a positive direction offensively, the injured guys being day-to-day, I think those are the positives to take away. The negatives, I just don't think they really have a shot. And if they run the same group tomorrow against Denver, I would not be surprised, honestly, if they get ran out of the gym. And that one might be just like a rout early because Denver is tended to have big starts against the Lakers in the first quarter as they adjust to the altitude. But with all that said, let's get into the Q&A here. See, first one from They See Me Trolling, They Can't Win. Thank you for the super chat. Alex Len is our best player with the GOAT emoji. I'm going to take your name at face value and assume you're trolling here. But thank you for the super chat. You looked better tonight, but again, the bar is so low that I don't think he's a rotation caliber player. Mitch Potter, thank you for the super chat. Luka, AR, and DK had 78% of our points, 63% of rebounds, 50% of assists, 74% of field goals made, 58% of field goals attempted. Need more than 3 players per game to show up. This is in line with something I've talked about before with this group, that I have felt that they just don't have the depth to withstand injuries. And I was saying that, before this stretch, and we saw, they've been able to, especially if it's like one of the bench players, or, I think more so those types of guys, or if it's an easier opponent, like they can kind of do it. But missing their 3 starting front court guys, and in Rui and LeBron, 2 guys combining for close to 40 points a night. Then you throw in Jackson, that's probably like almost 50 points a night across those 3 guys. And rebounding, rim protection, defensive versatility, just front court minutes, playing a bit bigger. Like, they just really miss that right now. So I don't know where the offense is going to come from. We could go back to the Brooklyn game. Excuse me, I just punched a wall. Gabe had 24, and Jordan Goodwin had 17, and DK had 19, I want to say. But that is more outlier, I think, than anything. I don't think you can expect Jordan Goodwin and Gabe to combine for 41 points and 11 threes consistently. That's just not their games. So I'm not quite sure. Like, it would be nice to see Gabe and DFS start to make some more shots. I think it would be nice to see a little bit more offensively from Jordan Goodwin, and DK, as I was mentioning. I think they could involve him even more offensively. But right now, they're just pretty compromised on both sides of the ball. And actually, the bigger issue is the defensive side, where I just don't think they have the requisite size and rebounding to match up with some of these other teams. And I don't yet know if Aaron Gordon's playing tomorrow or not. I'm going to assume he's not, but regardless of if he is or not, they're still a big team. They still have Jokic, and that's just going to be a really tough game. BG, thank you for the super chat. Hey, Jovan, I know a lot of it is contingent on one Braun, Rui, and Hayes return, but are you worried at all we might fall into the play-in? Houston, Golden State, Minnesota, all on win streaks right now. Please get healthy soon. Let's pull up the standings here, and let's go through it. Golden State's about to win, for whatever that is worth. They're up 23 on Sacramento. Let's pull up the standings here. So Lakers are technically tied in the loss column with Memphis and Denver, but both teams have 2 more wins than them. So it's the way things are trending. It looks like those 2 teams are likely going to finish ahead of the Lakers, but it ultimately depends on how long these front court guys are out. Houston is right there tied, and Lakers are 0.004 percentage points ahead of them. Then Golden State's 4 losses back. Minnesota is 5 losses back. I would say it to your question, it partly depends on, I think more so LeBron than anything, especially with this upcoming stretch. But if LeBron is back early next week or even mid next week, I don't think there's any concern. I think if he is out into the following weekend, or perhaps even longer, then I think some concern starts to creep in. I view Houston here as the biggest threat, just because they're technically tied with the Lakers, which would push them to push the Lakers to 5th in the West, and that to me seems like their realistic floor right now. And depending on again how they can survive this next stretch of like the next week, maybe they could get back into the 2-3 conversation. But if they lose to Denver, even if they, let's say, beat Phoenix and San Antonio, but then lose to Milwaukee and Denver again next week, then all of a sudden they're at 27 losses, which would put them pretty close to Golden State, depending on, like, maybe Golden State loses 1 game over the next week and they're like at like 29, but now you're pretty close there, and it might come down to like if you can beat them later in the season to give yourself some breathing room. So I'm not at that point yet. I think if anything, the Braun, Rui, and Jackson updates maybe a bit more optimistic that they can maintain a top 5 seed, but it is going to come down to, in my opinion, like I know the Lakers have weathered a lot of storms this season, and I know they've had some impressive shorthanded wins. I just think right now they're so compromised that like I just don't think, again, they have like the talent or the size to overcome this against like really good teams. They should be able to beat Phoenix and San Antonio, But the Milwaukees, the Denvers, going back out on the road, playing at Memphis, like those are going to be hard games, and they should have LeBron and everyone back by that next road trip. But they play within the next week. They play Denver twice and Milwaukee, and those are going to be, in my opinion, almost certainly losses if all three of these guys are still out. But if one of them's back, if a couple are back, I think they have a shot, and then especially if one of those guys is Braun. Next one from Fahim. Thank you for the super chat. How many legit 16-game players do the Lakers have? I don't count Vando and Hayes. 6 total, in my opinion. Historically, I wonder how many teams win a chip with this few. It's a good question. I think Luka, LeBron, and Austin are for sure 16-game players. I think Rui is 2. But I also think Rui has a low floor based on the Denver series and the Golden State series in the 2023 playoffs. Like, we've seen 4 playoff series from Rui. He's had 2 good series, 1 okay series in the Golden State one, and 1 bad series. So I think he's grown as a player and has been playing, I think, his best basketball as a Laker. So I'm going to pencil him in, but I still think there's a little bit of uncertainty there, at least for me. Gabe, DFS is 1 for sure, I think, based on his playoff history with Dallas. So, I mean, that puts 5. And then Gabe, I guess the last time we really saw him healthy in the playoffs was 2023, and he went on a finals run. So I think you could pencil him in. Vando, I kind of want to count as half. I think there are some teams that might be able to really constrict the offense with their personnel of like being able to ignore him, but also rotate out to him or rotate out to shooters if they're running like dribble handoffs with him. So I think there are some teams that can make his offensive limitations more pronounced, and then there's some teams where it's not going to matter. So I almost count him as like half. And then Jackson, it's tough. I'm not. I almost want to say 7. I almost want to count Jackson as a half too. Like I think Jackson's shown some real strides. I do think there are some limitations against certain teams that I would have been really fascinating to see what he looked like against like Boston, for example. But also, seeing what he looks like in a Memphis matchup, a Houston matchup. We haven't seen him as a starter against those teams, an OKC matchup. Like, I think there's a lot of questions with that. But I would say in general, I have a fair amount of confidence in their top 8. I don't have confidence beyond that. I think Jordan Goodwin is getting close, for me at least, as like a utility glue guy. Dalton, I think it really is just a matter of like, is he making shots or not? Because the defense has been better, but it's still not good. He's still a guy that he's going to be he's going to have a glaring target on his chest in the playoffs, where like that's going to be in the scouting report, is target Dalton as much as possible. So I don't know if he's quite ready for that. So I would say I'm somewhere. I think there's probably 5 guys I have real confidence in, and that would be what would be my closing lineup of LeBron, Luka, Austin, Rui, and DFS. I think all 5 of those guys should be fairly matchup proof. The other 3 in Gabe, Jackson, and Vando, I think are a little bit more matchup based on the Lakers roster and rotation they're going to play. So I'm not saying they're going to necessarily be played off the floor, but I'm saying for like a championship team or looking at like OKC, Cleveland, Boston, like how many of those guys would actually play? I feel like it's for sure only those 5. And then the other 3 might be more situational depending on the other roster. So the last team I would say that had this, I mean, like Denver, it was kind of 6 deep. You could argue 7 with Jeff Green. They were kind of 6.5, maybe 7 deep. So I think the Lakers are kind of like that, where it's a more top heavy, the starters. Although if you swap in DFS for Jackson and kind of view that as like the starting lineup, then it's like Jackson, Gabe, and Vando at kind of depends on the matchup, depends on the night. So that's how I'd tentatively say like 7, but and that's with some of the guys counting as like a half, which I know it's kind of cheating, but I'm trying to answer it as honestly as possible. Gorilla, thank you for the super chat. Giannis gets away with a ton of offensive fouls. He does, and he had 13 free throw attempts, and just 8 for 13 on free throws. But I also think part of it was, especially in like that third quarter, he was going up against guys who were like 6'4". The Lakers had a bunch of like 6'6" and under guys. Like over half the lineup was like 6'6" and under. So I think sometimes too, when a big guy's going up against a guy that much smaller, unless they are like really hammering them, which Giannis does. I'm not saying he doesn't do, but like I think it has to be blatant, and I think he is sometimes in between subtle and blatant. But yeah, he gets also they're at home, like that's just part of it. I'm not going to blame the refs tonight. I'm no. Mixelflix, Braun owns Golden State. Yeah, so I was just on Sam Vecini's podcast on his YouTube show, the Game Theory podcast, and he was posing all these hypotheticals in terms of potential opponents for the Lakers, and he asked me about Golden State, and I was just like, Braun has just owned Golden State. Like I think it is partly because of the mid 2010s and some of the beef and some of the rivalry there, but it just like the Lakers, I think, are better at small ball than they are. I do think Jimmy makes it a fairer fight, and that would be a competitive series, and maybe that's like a 6 or 7 game series. But ultimately, I have more confidence in LeBron and Luka compared to Steph and Jimmy, and I have more confidence in the Lakers' small ball looks, and really, especially compared to Golden State, I think they have more size in those small ball looks. So I think the Lakers would beat the Warriors. Jaxel. So following up, he says, new subscriber here, Jovan, how much confidence do you have that we could beat the new Golden State in the playoffs? I would like to see, like, I believe in just at least like seeing, and they do play one more time, but I have confidence. Like I think DFS and Vando and even Rui and LeBron, but more so DFS and Vando will be the primary guys on Jimmy. They don't have a great Steph matchup. Austin has actually defended him fairly well, all things considered, but I think that's where they'll really miss Max in that. That's the type of player that they'll miss Max against. It's going to be a lot of Austin and Gabe, but ultimately LeBron bullies them, and they're going to put Jimmy on him. They're going to put Draymond on him. They're going to put Kuminga on him. And I just don't think it's going to matter. I think he's going to have his way. They'll put Moody or Jimmy or Draymond. I mean, maybe even some Draymond on Luka, but I think those guys are just better. So I do think it will be a competitive series. I think it's probably a 6 or 7 game series, but I would pick the Lakers. The Art of War says Hayes is the anchor now. Ever since he joined the lineup, he's been good on both ends. He has been, and to be clear, I think there is a chance that Hayes just continues this into the playoffs. I do think just kind of like he needed to prove it a bit in the regular season, and he has. I think the playoffs are a different animal, and I think it would be, in my opinion, a bit short-sighted just to say like, well, because this is translating in the regular season, it's automatically going to translate in the playoffs. But with the way that Jackson has played, I think it is fair to assume he might not be quite at the same level, but if he's 80% as good, 85% as good, that's still a productive rotation player. So yeah, no, Jackson's a big part of it, especially when looking at the rest of the big bad group and like what the alternatives are. Jackson is far and away their best and most important center. As Jay Note says here, Len makes Jackson look like a top 10 big. Exactly. L.A. Jovan, what is your take on some media making fools of themselves lately? Lebitard's unfounded accusations, Shaq not knowing who coaches the Pistons, Stephen A. and Chuck's clown show. I actually I don't know what the Lebitard thing is. I'm gonna quickly catch up on that. I don't know. Okay, so I'm not seeing anything. If you could let me know in the chat what the Lebitard thing is. But Shaq not knowing who coaches the Pistons is not a surprise to me, and it pains me because I've said Shaq is my favorite player of all time. But the analysis does not go with that, and it's like, yeah, it's rough. And I think with TNT, in my opinion, it's always been about the vibes and the camaraderie and the relationships, and like it's a funny show. But I don't think people go to it for the basketball analysis. At least I hope people don't go to it for the basketball analysis, because I just don't like. I think they have great. They've had great segments and shows on like your stuff about culture or non-basketball stuff, but it's just like they have very antiquated takes, and it often devolves into just hating on the game and just crapping all over it. And then there's the who he play for segment with Chuck. That's like, it's funny, but it's also kind of like, this is one of the top media people in the industry, and he doesn't know who like rotation players are on like lottery teams. And then you have one of the other prominent media people in the business not knowing who coaches the Pistons and just assuming that because Chauncey Billups played for the Pistons that he coaches them, even though he's been a Portland coach for multiple years now. So that one I wasn't surprised by. I don't think it's like that big of a deal, because I feel like you could find multiple examples of inside the NBA, like not knowing something or wrongly saying something. So that, again, I love them as a crew together, but I don't watch it or consume it for the basketball takes, because I think, again, most of them are just incorrect. Then Stephen A and Chuck, I think Chuck, for whatever reason, just doesn't like the Lakers. I don't know. I mean, both of them seem to have some type of beef with LeBron that I don't know where that stems from. But I think with Stephen A, it's kind of been the Jordan versus LeBron thing, and he's a Jordan guy, and and even Chuck is kind of like that, despite having a falling out with Jordan. But Chuck is always anti-Lakers, and that's not a surprise. The Stephen A thing, I've tried to stay out of that one. It's just, I think it, I will just point to, like, he has said multiple times on the record that if a player has an issue with him, go talk to him, excuse me. And LeBron did that, and that he had an issue with it. So, that one I'm gonna stay out of. But I think you could probably read how I feel about it through my answer here. Braden, thank you for the super chat. Over this stretch, I've realized how important Rui's scoring is to the team. Wasted a big Luka game. At least Austin got back in the groove. Yeah, no, I think Rui's been instrumental. Jackson's been instrumental. LeBron is LeBron, so no need to really explain it further than that. But yeah, Rui, I think the scoring, the cutting, the shooting, the transition play, Rui's a huge part of this team. I think the defense, and he probably would have started the game off on Giannis tonight. And he could have also, if they went small, been the guy guarding Lopez and sticking with him, because I think that was a big thing tonight, was because Lopez is a pick and pop big, a catch and shoot big, and he could even space multiple feet beyond the arc. With the way the Lakers were loading up the paint, scrambling, and then rotating, that was a hard rotation for Alex Len to make. And I think having Rui or LeBron or Vando in that spot instead of Alex Len would have, been a better and more effective defensive strategy. The problem was they didn't have, again, like the horses to do that, the healthy bodies to do that. So I think having Rui on Giannis, and then some of those other guys doing that, or having some of those guys on Giannis and Rui doing that, I think it would have really helped. Jackson, Jovan, what is going on with Alex Len? He sucks. My read on the situation is I think the Lakers are testing what they have with him. He played the first 2 games, was awful, hasn't played since, but I think being around the group and having a bit more time to grasp the playbook and the concepts and all that stuff, I think they wanted to give him a shot. I think they also were running into the 2-way limit with Jemison and Koloko soon. So I think that's an element here, but I think they wanted to give him a final shot to see what he looks like. I expect he'll continue playing because he's the only actual roster big among those 3, but the minutes have been bad. I would personally start Jemison or Koloko over him, like whichever big is available that night among the 2-way guys. And I think that this is ultimately just trending toward him being waived at the end of the season. I really don't see a point in keeping him on the roster. Tai, thank you for the super chat. They need to let DK shoot more. He's better with the green light. If not, he's only a target on D. Gabe and DFS are not a reliable shot. Gabe and DFS have really been going through it. I'm going to pull up their shooting recently because outside of interestingly, the 2 New York Times for Gabe, the at Brooklyn and home versus the Knicks, he has not been shooting well. But DFS has been in a bit of a slump here, dating back to, it looks like, starting with the Denver game, actually. Since the Denver game, he's shooting 25% on threes over his past 3, 6, 8. And that doesn't include tonight. So tonight he went 1 for 5. So it's going to be even lower than 25%. And Gabe is going to guess probably somewhere in the same ballpark. Let's see here. Gabe, this one goes back to, we'll say the Charlotte game, post All-Star break. Gabe's at 31.6%, and then tonight he went 0 for 5, so that's probably closer to like 30% now. So yeah, those 2 guys have been in prolonged shooting slumps, and it's really hurt the Lakers. I think Dalton does need to shoot more. I think he has the green light. I think there's also an element of the way the offense is being run, and I think he is a guy who thrives a bit more in organized offense, and they haven't been as organized recently. But I think they could call his number more. I also think they could put the ball in his hands more. I think you can never have too many ball handlers. Like, of course, there's going to, like, the offense is going to run through Luka and Austin and those guys playmaking, but I think you can still do things to put the ball, get Dalton on the move, and get him with an advantage attacking downhill. And I would like to see a little bit more of that because I think he's got the pull-up shot. He can get to the rim depending on the rim defender. And especially when he's playing in these second unit groups, I think a lot of the second unit bigs can't really stop him. So I think he can get to the rim, finish, or draw fouls. Ahmed Braun, thank you for the super chat. We miss Braun's voice on defense. We look lost on that end last couple of games, late doubles, slow rotations, etc. No more Alex Sun, please. I'm with you on the last point, and I'm with you on the first point as well. I think they've really missed LeBron, and this, I've said this all season. This has been a group that is relatively quiet, all things considered. I think most of these guys are kind of shy and introverts, and when the Lakers are at their worst, communication is often a problem that JJ cites and that the group cites. And I think they missed DFS last game in Brooklyn, and I think it was better to have him back. But I think LeBron is also a big part of, he's their defensive quarterback. So yeah, I think that was another thing. Jonathan Safar, thank you for the super chat. Are we screwed, Jovan? No, I don't think so. Like the only way I think the Lakers would be screwed is if, like I just mentioned the 5 guys I really trust. I think if any of those 5 were out for the season, out for the playoffs, I would even throw Jackson in there because the big drop off is just so stark. I think Vando or Gabe, they could probably survive for a little bit or a round or two. I don't think they could win the title without those guys. But I yeah, I mean, I think they need the top 8. If they have the top 8 in relatively good health going into the playoffs, I think they're in a really good spot. And whether they're the 2 seed, the 3 seed, the 4 seed, the 5 seed, I think they're going to win in round 1. And then I think once we get to round 2, it's about the matchups and who they're playing and how those teams are playing. And just like, then it, I think I said it before. I think the only 2 teams in the West that can beat them are Denver and OKC. And I said can beat them. I didn't say will beat them because I also think the Lakers match up well with both of those teams. And you could make a case could be favored or with OKC, I think OKC should be favored in that series, but I think it's close. With Denver, I think you can make a case either way, but I lean with a healthy Lakers, especially if they have home court, I would obviously pick them. But without home court, I think it's a little closer to 50-50. So I think the Lakers are forest through the trees. Lakers are going to be fine in the short term, as long as I'll say this: tomorrow, Denver, they're screwed. Like barring I think you need similar Luka and Austin performances, and then you need like Dalton or Gabe or both to like catch fire, and somehow to limit Jokic with this personnel. When like LeBron, Jackson, and Rui were all big parts of the Lakers' success in that game. So screwed in the short term. Long term, I think they're fine. Norman Maldonado, thank you for the super chat. Hi, Daddy. I'm with Gammy. Sorry, Lakers lost. Love you. That is my son. So shout out to Chandler. Let's say shout out to Chandler in the chat. I love you too. You should be going to bed. It is pretty late, but you have a half day tomorrow. So you're like me. You're a night owl. But everybody say shout out to Chandler in the chat. And then Michael D. He's more football, but thoughts on Shannon Sharp. Thank you for the super chat. I like Shannon Sharp. I think that he is really built a smart media, or he's gone about building his media empire in a smart way. And I like that he also has guests on in other, the biggest interview of 2024 was him having Cat Williams on at the start of the year. And like that broke all these records for like biggest interview. And so I like, he plays in multiple like realms of culture. And I think that is cool. And I think he's done a really good job of just ascending through the industry. And I think he's one of the power players. Like, right now it's Stephen A, it's Pat McAfee, it's Shannon Sharp, it's Bill Simmons, like, Levitard is up there too. I'm more so saying like on the journalist / like content creator TV, like, cause I'm not really putting the former players in there. Although of course Shannon Sharp is a former player, but like he's doing different stuff than like Barkley is or Kendrick Perkins, for example. Right. So I kind of put him in a different tier than that. Although if you want to throw Barkley in, you can throw him in. But I like Shannon Sharp. BLC, bad refereeing last 3 games. Lakers need to play through it. I mean, if you're going to include tonight, I would say last 4 games, because I thought the Knicks game, the Celtics game, the Nets game were all bad refereed games. But I, as a principal, kind of don't like to lean into that as an excuse. And I don't think you are either. And as you say, that they got to play through it. Jackson, thank you for the super chat. I am scared of a round 1 matchup with Houston, too athletic. It's fair. I think Houston, of all the teams, I'll say this, of all the teams in the top 5 right now, so I guess removing the Lakers, the other 4 top 5 teams, I think Houston has the personnel to bother LeBron and Luka the most. But between Brooks and Eason and Smith and Green and Thompson and like they just have athletes and size and athleticism and physicality and youth, like a blend of that. And I'm probably forgetting some players on their team. I'm going to pull up their last box score. I know Thompson's out, but yeah, Brooks, Eason, Green, Smith's back now, Cam Whitmore, Tate, and they don't even play all these guys necessarily, but they have a lot of athletes. The two things that give me some confidence is I still think Şengün ultimately is. I love Şengün, but I think there's a limitation there, kind of similar to Jokic. And I would even say he's not in the same class defensively as Jokic. It's to me kind of more like like Sabonis, I guess. I think he's better than Sabonis defensively, and Houston's been good defensively with him. So like he's already shown he can be part of a good defense, which I think is part of this when we talk about some of the more offensive minded guys who like are defense liabilities. It's like, can you at least be a part of a good defense? And I think Şengün has shown he could do that. I still have some concerns ultimately, like Luka, LeBron calling him into actions, getting downhill. He's the last line of defense. I think he's gotten better defensively, but I don't know if he's ready for that matchup. And then the other thing is, and this is actually even talking to Houston people about this, like their late game offense is just like, I don't really know what they do. There will be maybe a game or two where Jalen Green just gets hot and he drops 30, 35, and maybe they get enough from the supporting cast, and Şengün has a big game and like they win. But I don't think they have a clear late game offensive identity. And I think you're inevitably going to have multiple close games in the playoffs. And if it's like Luka and LeBron versus Jalen Green and Şengün, I far and away lean the Luka and LeBron. Like the Lakers have the two best players by a wide margin, in my opinion, in that series. So that's where I would still pick the Lakers. But I get it. Like I think the athleticism, like right now, I think part of the Lakers' advantage has been because of the way they've reshaped the team and because of the strides with Jackson and Rui and LeBron, the way he's ramped up the defense, and then adding Luka, adding DFS, like they have all these big wings and athletes and whatnot. And they are overwhelming a lot of teams with their size and their athleticism. But I think Houston is one of the teams they can't really do that against because Houston can match them, if not surpass them there. And when they don't have that advantage, I think that does make some things a little bit harder for them. But ultimately, I would still pick Houston. I mean, I'd still pick the Lakers over Houston. Excuse me. BLC, thank you for the super chat. As long as we finish in the top 6 when healthy, we'll be fine. That's where I'm at too. I think the one disaster scenario which I've thought about is they drop to 6 and then they get Denver. I still think they could beat Denver, but that's like, I think you'd rather not play Denver in round 1, right? Like I think you'd rather probably have like more of a warm up series to build up to playing Denver, OKC in round 2. So, I mean, maybe it's just bring on Denver and see what happens. But like the disaster scenario is like you drop to 6, you play Denver, you lose to Denver. Now you lost in round 1 with Luka and LeBron, and you just kind of have this like what if of the season. So, but that's like I think that's like the everything goes wrong scenario. More often than not, I think they're going to be fine. I think they're going to be in the top 6, and I think they're going to win at least a round, if not a couple. Jonathan Safar, just hope Lakers don't end up in the play-in. I think we're way too like again, they're 5 games in the loss column ahead of Minnesota. I think they'd really have to drop several. Like, look, if they lose, I'll say this: they lose tomorrow in Denver, then they lose to Phoenix. We could start to circle the wagons a little bit in terms of the fear gang. But I think the Phoenix game is going to be a big one because if you lose that, Denver, Milwaukee are going to be tough next week, even if you get the guys back. Like those are just two good teams, two tough teams, and it's a back to back. So we'll see. But tentatively, I think it's too early to be concerned. Arthur Johnson, thank you for the super chat. Is it healthier for the player to stay in LA as opposed to staying in a hotel for 2 days? Isn't that a fatigue factor to be in a hotel rather than your own bed? I would think they would be burnt out. Yes, it is healthier for a player to stay in LA as opposed to staying in a hotel for 2 days, because you also have to think about the travel. So right now, them being sent home from New York, they just made the one flight from New York to LA. Whereas if they remained on the trip, it would have been flying New York to Milwaukee, Milwaukee to Denver. So you're adding 2, and then Denver back to LA. So now you're adding 2 more flights, and those aren't necessarily like I just flew from New York to Milwaukee. That was, I believe, like a 2.5, almost 3 hour flight. Then 2.5, and then Milwaukee to Denver is also about 2.5. So, and for them, maybe with the private jets and stuff, it's comfier. It's maybe a little faster, but that getting off the plane, adjusting to different time zones, getting to your hotel, and then like Kleba, for example, is in a boot. So I can, I tore my Achilles. I had to travel in a boot. Not good. Like it was basically recommended to me to not travel, and I still did it because I was like, I'm not missing the games. I'm not, I missed 2 weeks, and then I was traveling as quickly as I could. But traveling is not good for injuries. It increases, like being on a plane increases your swelling. It restricts your blood flow. And in general, if you have, and all those guys have lower body injuries. LeBron has groin, Jackson and Rui have knee, and Kleba has got the foot. So I think with all of their specific injuries, it was better to just get back and rest, go to the facility, do some training back there with the training staff, and that. I think it was a smart, proactive decision by the team. Like, frankly, I think LeBron probably shouldn't have even gone to New York, and really, I mean, I think once they're ruled out, and know that, then just send them back. But I'm sure at some level he probably enjoyed at least being on the New York portion of the trip. Shooter Guy 7. Hey, Jovan, do you think we should have not rescinded the Mark Williams trade in hindsight? It's tough to say. Like, I know what the medical said, or part of what the medical said. And I think there was long-term concern on the Lakers side. And so if you were viewing it from a short-term perspective, I think Mark Williams would have helped this team more than Dalton would. I think he's a better player than Dalton. But longer term, it was going to, you don't give up all they gave up for Mark Williams not to keep him. And if you kept him long term, you were running the risk of him potentially getting injured and or further aggravating some of his injuries, and that just being a really bad investment. So I think my final answer on this will be based on what they do in 2025 and 2026 in terms of, do they add another high-level center this summer or the next offseason, or do they keep the cap sheet relatively clean, and then in 2026 add another star, maybe LeBron retires, and they add that next star to pair with Luka down the road. So I think that will play a part in how, like, I think with trades, there's always kind of like the short-term outlook, and then there's the long-term outlook. And the long-term outlook, we honestly don't know until like a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road. Like, I think trades have a way of sort of evolving. And like, for example, the Nets Celtics trade going back to 2013 was horrible in the moment, but then it got blown to an even different level of terrible because they got Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown out of that trade, right? So you didn't know, like, you had an idea those were going to be good picks, but we see all the time, good picks don't always necessarily lead to like franchise level players. But then it's like, okay, well, they ended up getting Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, and they won the championship finally in 2024. And it's like, those two guys should have been Nets. Those two guys should have been leading the Nets to a championship, not the Celtics. So that's where like that trade aged even worse. So with the Luka trade, with the Mark Williams rescindment, I think we'll have better perspectives down the road. Again, I think he makes them a better team just because he's better than Dalton and he's much better than Alex Led and like, some of the Lakers' current big man options. But I think the longer term risk ultimately probably wasn't worth it. And I think if there was a way to like reduce what they gave up and keep him, I would have been more open to that, but they couldn't. They had missed that deadline. So I think ultimately I think things worked out. Like you can't really argue with the results. They've looked pretty good. Jackson's been awesome. And I think it'd be nice to have a better, like another center of his caliber or even worse, but like better than I guess some of the current options. Like it would be better to have a better second center than Trey Jemison, but that's where they're at currently. Jeremy McWells, thank you for the super chat. This year with Luka feels like a test year. We probably have to wait until next year for a better roster construction. Jovan, what's the best way to get in contact with you for a collab? Best way to get in contact with me is either on Instagram at Jovan Buha or jbuha at The Athletic is my email. And I think I agree with you to an extent, but I would even say though that like the way they've looked with Luka and the way they've looked over the past 2 months to me is like, I think they could win it. Like, I don't think they're the favorite. I don't think they're the best team. I think they have some flaws. I think they're going to need some luck to win it. But I would say I think they're right there as like the fourth best team in the league. And they do have to get healthy. And I think them potentially dropping to 5 or 6 would lower their chances of winning it. But to your point, like I think there is a testing element to this year where it's like, this is not the final form of this group. I think they will have another offseason to make some improvements. And this is kind of like let's see which pieces fit. Let's see what we need. But even amidst that, like they might be able to win it all as constructed. And I don't think that's crazy. Again, I think OKC, Cleveland, and Boston are still the 3 best teams. I think at their apex, Boston is the best team. I think they will need Porzingis back though to beat an OKC or to beat a Cleveland. I think if they don't have Porzingis, I think they lose to either one of those teams. But yeah, but that's the best way to get in contact with me. All right, catching up on going to go about 5 more minutes and a real 5 minutes because I front end of a back-to-back. I have to travel. Ashwin Prasad, Jovan, have you changed your DFS start opinion? Think he is an offensive liability lately. Teams are going to cheat off him in the playoffs if the bad shooting continues. I have, in part because I don't think it's going to happen. In part because I've learned some new information and some new context to the situation that has changed my opinion. But I think the biggest thing is just how awesome Rui has been. I think Rui has been an amplifier offensively with his skill set around Luka and LeBron and Austin, and just fits in perfectly next to them. And then I think defensively, he's really stepped up. And I think really the combination of him and Jackson together, they've both, like, I think if you look at Jackson and Rui's defense respectively earlier in the season and compare it to now, they both have dramatically improved. And I think in a way, with LeBron defending at the level he's been at, and then using Jackson sometimes on wings or more as like a helper and Rui as the primary guy on bigs, it's just kind of like worked really well together in a way that I think if you had DFS can guard some bigs too, that they are kind of different defenders though. And I think it if DFS was in the starting group, they'd probably use him more on wings than bigs, and then that would have a ripple effect of then Jackson more on bigs, and I don't like that as much. Or then now putting LeBron more on bigs, and like I think it's more of a playoff look, in my opinion, unless you're going small. So I still stay like I've changed my opinion on it. I still stand by my initial opinion of like I think at the time there was a legitimate argument to be made that DFS should have been starting. JJ acknowledged that he was considering it. I know internally that was something that was being considered, but they, for various reasons, chose not to do it, and it's worked out. So I can't really go against that. Like that. This is where, and it's funny how, and this to me is like just my basketball ideology of like I go with how I'm viewing the situation at the time. Because last year it was the opposite of Torian was starting, and I was making the case for Rui to start, and it took forever for that change to happen. But the second it did, the Lakers took off, and you saw the results were there, especially compared to what the results were when Torian was starting. And I think this has been the opposite, where they kept Rui in the starting group, and it actually ended up working out. But I think for me, I'm not really tied to like any one opinion or one player. Like last year, I thought Rui should have started. This year, I was fine with him starting. And then at some point, I felt like DFS was playing better. The on-off data was supporting DFS as the better player, and he was shooting better for a brief stretch there. And then, but look, Rui's been awesome. So I have changed my opinion, and regardless, I don't think it's going to happen either way. David Parks, do you think the non-Cam garbage minutes stems from beef between Cam and JJ? It's an interesting question that I've been trying to figure out. I have maintained, and if you look at Cam's game logs, the falling out point was the San Antonio game at home in early January. From that point on, and he had I think he went 1 for 7. He missed a couple layups. He missed a bunch of open threes. I think he airballed one or had like a really bad miss. And I also think what was pretty poor defensively. He was getting blown by on the perimeter. And I think that game was like almost a permanent doghouse game, because if you look at it, he just has not been in the rotation since then. And he's barely even played in garbage time. Then the Lakers traded him. He has not played since the trade. He is the leading candidate to be waived right now. It's between him and Alex Len, but I think Cam, I'd probably be both of them, and they'll just put Jemison and Goodwin on the roster at the end of the season. But I wonder if part of it's just like they know they're going to waive him, and they don't want to play anyone who might not be there. But then at the same time, they're playing Len. So I don't have a great answer for you, but it is, I don't think there's a beef. Cause I will say, like, Cam, seeing him in the locker room, he's always in good spirits. Like he's got good relationships with Keefe and Vando. And I think he's in Austin, like he's a beloved figure in the locker room. So I don't think he's like some locker room, like, malcontent or something, but it is interesting that like, even in a night like tonight, he is the lone guy who can't get off the bench. Ken Carter, what will it take for the Lakers to win it all this year, in your opinion? Health. I think that's a big thing, and that's a factor that is out of their control. I also think I do kind of think having maybe a slightly like a non-Denver OKC matchup in round 1 to just get a series win under their belt, and also I think both of those series would be like 6 or 7 game series. So like potentially having like a 4 or 5 game series, depending on the opponent, that would be nice for them to just kind of get that out of the way. And maybe they play Houston and they beat them in like 5, and then they're in the second round. They have a certain level of confidence, and they can kind of build off of that. because sometimes for a group, like I feel like this is a group that has really continued to thrive off of like these statement wins and really believing what they're building. And I think having that in the first round will just continue to take that to a different level. And then you play Denver, OKC in second round, and like now you're entering with a certain level of confidence and belief because you just did it. You just won a round and whatnot. So I think it just comes down to health. I also think it probably has to be on some level. I think it's going to come down to like the shot making from the supporting cast, because I think because of the way that Luka and LeBron are and how great they both are respectively in the playoffs, I think teams are really going to, we're going to see more of the blitzing and the doubling and the really shrinking the floor. And I thought you saw that tonight from Milwaukee a bit, where they even started to mix in some of that stuff at various points. And then teams start to really pack the paint, and you see Luka or Austin might try to hit a pocket pass, and that's where there's like 3 Bucks players surrounding that Lakers. So I think teams are really going to try to shrink the floor and dare the Lakers to make shots, or non-LeBron, Luka, Austin players to make shots. And it might just come down to, can Rui, Gabe, DFS, Dalton, Jordan, however the rotation is, can those guys make shots? And I think Rui and DFS, I know, is in the shooting slump. I think he will be. We have a larger sample size of DFS being a good shooter, especially in the playoffs. So I think those 2 guys will make shots. So it might just be like, can Gabe and Dalton make shots, or whoever's like the 9th man if they play a 9th man. Vando's another factor here of like teams are really going to ignore him, dare him to shoot. So I think it's probably health and like the performance of the supporting cast. I do feel like the supporting cast at times has been like, they've had these stretches where they all play well together, and I think that's a little bit harder to sustain in a playoff series. But if they can do it, obviously, I think they can win the title. So I think for me, it would come down to like health and Luka, LeBron, Austin all being able to play like 40 plus minutes, and LeBron and Luka taking their game to a different level, which I think they both can, and then also the supporting cast like continuing a lot of their regular season success, which I think is, again, doesn't always correlate. Mr. TD, I don't even like the Lakers. I'm here for the hair tips. Well, you're in the right spot. Let me know what you want to know. L.A. Jovan, you think LeBron will play enough games to qualify for postseason awards? Yeah, he's just got to play 7 more games. So he seems to be in line with that. I think so. Mo Love, Alex Len gave us the lead in the game. He did. It was a very involved Alex Len. He took the first 2 shots of the game, and then he even got an elbow touch on the 3rd one. So, yeah, a lot of Alex Len. Harry Chinani, thank you for the super chat. Offense, not good without LeBron and Rui. This is why Rui is important as the 4th scorer. DFS needs to step up on offense. Everyone else on the roster besides DK are all defense first players. Yeah, I agree with everything you're saying. I would even throw Jackson Hayes in there as a rim runner in vertical lob threat. I think that's a big part of their offense, especially now with Luka. But Rui is important as a 4th scorer. DFS needs to be better offensively, and most of these guys are defense first. Sky Falcon 5, would you rest everyone tomorrow? It's tough. I would say I wouldn't rest everyone. I would consider resting the guys who aren't healthy. The problem is that's Luka, Austin, and DFS. And if you rest Luka, Austin, and DFS, you're probably going to lose by like 50 points. I'm not even kidding. Like, let's just look at the starting lineup would be Gabe, Alex Len, Dalton Connect, Jordan Goodwin, and Jared Vanderbilt in Denver. And then you'd probably play a healthy dose of Koloko, Shake, probably call up Bronny, Keefe, Cam, Reddit. Maybe Cam gets dusted off. Like, it'd be grim. You would lose by a lot. Maybe you rest Luka because of how banged up he's been. I also think Austin, as I mentioned, was icing his hand. DFS still has the ankle injury. I just think there's really what I would probably do is maybe I rest Luka and then play the other guys. But I personally would have a quick hook on tomorrow of like if the Lakers are down like 20 early in the second quarter, maybe I ride out the second quarter just to see if you could go on a run, and then I just bench the key guys in the second half. Like there's really no point because you're going to need those guys in 36 hours against the Suns. So I don't see the point in like tiring them out or risking injury if you kind of know you're going to lose the game. So I would maybe play some of the guys in the first half just to kind of see if the game's close. But that's actually one kind of thing I get why JJ, but it was like this game was over at the end of the third quarter and he still played a lot of the starters into the fourth. And it was just like, I don't think they ever got within closer than 17. So felt like he kind of wasted an opportunity to rest some of the guys. Harry Chinani, thank you for the super chat. Got a lot of Warriors stuff going on in the chat tonight. Actually, I missed BLC and Rob. We trust this team will only get better next year. They certainly have a higher ceiling for next season, assuming LeBron can maintain his LeBron-ness, which I think he should be able to. Francis, will LBJ return to play 65 games for All-NBA? I believe so. He's got to play 7 more. So I think so. And Harry Chinani, thoughts on Golden State now as contenders on a roll now. They are. I could see them getting up as high as like number 6. I don't, which would for me be number 4 in the West. I don't see them beating, in my opinion, the Thunder, the Lakers, or the Nuggets. So could they be as high as number 6 overall? I think that's within the cards. Like I think Jimmy is the best true number 2 that Steph has had since KD. And because really, right when KD got injured, then, Clay got injured. And it was like, since then, I think that this Jimmy's better than the post multiple injuries version of Clay. So I think he's the best number 2 that Steph has had post KD, and that is scary. And you've seen Steph return to form. I think you've seen Draymond return to form. I think that they're still figuring out, like Kuminga and Moody are still developing into the players they'll become. So they're a really good team, but I think there's a lot of really good teams in the West. And, I think like them versus Denver 3-6 would be a fun series. Them versus the Lakers 3-6 would be a fun series, but I would still take OKC, Denver, and LA ahead of them. Joe Little, what's your prediction for the top 6 in the West? That's tough. I will pull up Tankathon and look at the. I'll share my screen with this. All right, so this is in order of toughest remaining schedule to easiest. Lakers have the 4th toughest. Memphis has the 7th toughest, excuse me. Golden State's at 11. Denver's at 11. Golden State's at 12. I'm getting to the loopy part of the night. And where's Houston? Houston's at 17. So technically Houston has the easiest remaining schedule. And I also look at games remaining because that can be an advantage. Like, again, as I mentioned, Denver and Memphis have the same amount of losses as the Lakers, but they have 2 more wins, which means they already have a couple more wins banked. Like, the Lakers have to make up those wins. Oof. I would say this is tough. This is really tough. Denver does not play OKC or Boston or Cleveland again. Memphis plays each one of those teams, and Denver and the Lakers and the Warriors. Lakers play OKC twice, Denver twice. Memphis, Lakers have a really tough schedule. I would tentatively say Houston's down there, plays OKC once, Denver twice, Lakers twice, Warriors. And then Warriors played Knicks, Nuggets twice, Grizzlies, Lakers, Rockets, Bucks. It's a little bit easier for the Warriors. I'll still say Golden State ends up 6. I think it's going to be hard for them to. I will say. I think, okay, I'll say. I'll say 1 is OKC, shocker. 2 is Denver, 3 is Memphis, 4 is Lakers, 5 is Rockets, 6 is Warriors. Lakers play Rockets in round 1 in the 4-5, but they have home court. They win the series in 5. Houston gets, let's say, game 3. Lakers go up 2-0. Houston wins game 3. Lakers win game 4. Lakers win game 5. Then Lakers play OKC in round 2. OKC upsets Memphis in the 3-6 and then plays Denver in round 2. And those are your top 4 in the West. Kickstaff says 1. Oh, this is the Warriors guy. Lakers at 7 is wild. That is, I'm not even going to entertain that one. Lakers are not. No username 12. I'll end here because I've gone surprise a little bit over here with what's new. That again that needs to be my merch. Is I went a little bit over. But no, I'll end here with no username 12's question. Percent chance Lakers finish top 6, you say? I would say 85%. I'm leaving the 15% just because they're already so banged up that there's always a chance. I mean, if we're being completely honest about LeBron's banged up, Luka's banged up, Austin's banged up, Rui's banged up, Jackson's banged up, DFS is banged up. Gabe's even a little banged up, but I won't throw him in there. But 6 of the top 8 guys are either currently injured and out or banged up and like potentially out on back-to-backs and stuff. So if any one of those 6 guys suffers a setback or an aggravation, I think that's going to really hurt this team. And again, when I was talking earlier about like the 6 guys they can't afford to lose, I think those are actually all the 6 guys that are currently injured or banged up. And like Gabe and Vando are the 2 that they're, a little bit more expendable kind of, but even not like, I don't think any of the top 8 are expendable, but I think they could find a way to get by potentially without those 2. So if one of those 6 gets further hurt or aggravated, that would be where I think maybe they start to drop some games that they shouldn't later in the season and fall out of the top 6. But again, 85% is a pretty high percentage. I'm fairly confident because think about, they would, even with how good let's just say, Houston's got the easier schedule. Golden State's rolling. Denver and Memphis are currently ahead of them. So all those teams, we'll say Houston and Golden State past them, they're still at 6, and they're still 5 games currently in the loss column ahead of Minnesota. So I know Minnesota's playing well, but 5 losses with 18 games to go for the Lakers is like, that's a pretty big gap there. So I think it would have to be something like catastrophic really for them to fall out. I will leave some room for error there in terms of like maybe LeBron's out for longer than we think, or maybe he comes back and has a setback or something with Luka or something like that. That's where I think that could happen. But I might even bump it up to like 90%. So I really don't see, how the Lakers fall out of the top 6. Joe Little says ESPN has them at 95% to finish top 6. So there you go. I'll maybe lower it a little bit to 90 because I'm factoring in some of the injuries that maybe they're not fully calculating, but it's right there. So that will do it, though, for tonight's show. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. For those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back in about 24 hours, maybe a little bit less, to discuss the Lakers-Nuggets game. We'll see if Luka plays. We'll see if Austin plays. We'll see if DFS plays. We'll see how many of these guys play. The Lakers are really decimated right now, which will make things, let's say, interesting tomorrow. But either way, I'll be back to cover it all. I'll talk to you all then.